The blindness of the narcissist. You and the narcissist look at the world through a different lens. Yours is through the lens of emotional empathy. Ours is through the lens of control. You are guided by the emotional empathy that you have, often unconsciously. It causes you to behave in a particular way, whereby, for instance, you don't routinely steal, you don't go and insult people, you don't walk into somebody's house uninvited, you don't pinch the food off somebody's plate unless they offer you to try and taste it or you ask first, and so on and so forth. In other instances, your emotional empathy guides you by way of causing you to think about how would the other person feel as a consequence of your behaviour, which then enables you to regulate it accordingly. We don't have that. Instead, we look at the world very simply. Are you with us or against us? Are you under control or are you threatening our control? And our behaviours are governed accordingly. Of course, lesser and mid-range narcissists, being unaware narcissists, don't know that this is the way that they look at the world. The greater narcissist and the ultra know full well. This shift in perspective means that the narcissist is invariably blinded to much of their behaviour. It prevents the narcissist from understanding truly what they are doing and the motivations and reasons behind them. It is necessary for the lesser and mid-range narcissist to be blinded in this way because they don't have the ability to be fixed with knowledge and implement control and pursue the prime aims. Look at it like this. As you're listening to me, your heart is pumping blood around your body. Your lungs are moving in and out, drawing in air and expelling carbon dioxide. Your gastric juices are digesting the last meal that you've had. Your liver is processing toxins. Are you consciously thinking about all of these things being done? You might have an itch on your leg and you scratch it, and you do so without necessarily thinking about it. You might drive somewhere and then think, how did I get here? I don't actually remember the journey. Your brain operates many functions for you and activities in the unconscious, and it does so in order to avoid you, in essence, being overloaded. They run like background apps. And the narcissism is similar for the lesser and mid-range narcissist. It has to run in the background to avoid overloading that particular narcissist and also to necessitate speed. An instantaneous response. For instance, if you threaten the narcissist's control, there is an instantaneous response via the 3 assertions of control from the narcissist. Therefore, control will be obtained quickly. If the narcissist had to think in these terms, this person is threatening my control. What shall I do about it? I know I will use a manipulation against them. Which is the most appropriate one for me to use here? Should I go with a circular conversation, a word salad? Shall I punch them on the nose? Or shall I utilise some form of provocation? I know provocation should work here. By the time that all of that's been thought through, the control has been lost. And therefore the narcissism has failed. The construct would start to collapse. And therefore, in effect, the lesser and mid-range narcissists are not allowed to be aware of what they are. Because if they were, the narcissism wouldn't function effectively. And therefore, they are blinded to the presence of their narcissism, which in turn blinds them to the behaviours that are caused by that narcissism. They're blinded to their sense of entitlement, or it's justified. They're blinded to their lack of emotional empathy. In some, they don't see that it matters. In others, they will have cognitive empathy. They will be blinded to the fact that they act with a lack of accountability. I don't have to explain myself, or they will explain themselves in a way that divests them of accountability. It's not my job to do that. Being one example of that. Or, quite simply, it's not my fault, it's your fault. The whole range of different indicators and characteristics and behaviours of the narcissist and the narcissistic dynamic will be blinded to the lesser and mid-range narcissist to ensure that they function effectively, to enable them to achieve the prime aims quickly and without difficulty. If they had to think about it, they'd hesitate, they'd fail, they wouldn't achieve it. And therefore they are not allowed to be aware of what they are as part of what the self-defense mechanism is. A useful way of being able to see that in action would be to consider this. If you sat down with a lesser narcissist, be they lower lesser, middle lesser, upper lesser A or upper lesser B, and took a piece of paper and drew a line down the middle, and on the left-hand side you put your name, and then on the right-hand side you put the narcissist's name, and then underneath your name you would list all the people in your life that you've truly fallen out with, had major problems with, thermonuclear, explosive relationships. For some of you, there would just be one name, namely the narcissist that you're currently with. For others, you may have 4 or 5, because you may have had the misfortune to have narcissists in your family and a string of relationships with narcissists. But the list will not be extensive. Now, then you turn to the narcissist, and you list everybody that that narcissist has ever fallen out with that you're aware of. Top of the list, your name, then the ex's name, then the ex before that, and then the ex before that. The brother and the sister of the narcissist, his parents, a neighbour, maybe 2 neighbours, a teacher at school, a colleague, 2 colleagues, 5 colleagues, somebody from the chess club, somebody from the football team that they play on, the lollipop lady, a police officer, a service provider, the gardener, some friends. On and on goes the list, and there could be 30, 50, 100 names there. Then you turn to the lesser narcissist, and you say, look, under my name there's just one. Name yours. Under yours there's 30 different names. What does that tell you? The lesser narcissist would not sit there and think, do you know what? You're right. I have a real tendency to fall out with people. That must mean that I'm a problem. His narcissism will not allow him to see that, because if he was able to see that, that would mean that he would be ceding control, he would be admitting fault, he would be making himself accountable for the failure of these relationships or the problems that have occurred in them. And the narcissist is just plain not allowed to do that. Accordingly, what will then happen is that the lesser would just turn and say, they're all fucking arseholes. He doesn't even have to explain himself. His attitude is my way or the highway. They're idiots, fools. They don't understand me. People just like to fall out with me. I'm just trying to get on with life. They would be dismissive of the entire group, labelling them all as idiots, arseholes, fools, etc. He sees nothing wrong with his behaviour. He doesn't think that it is problematic. And therefore, this blindness that he has to his behaviour manifests very neatly in that example. So that's the wrecking ball that is the lesser narcissist. But what about the mealy-mouthed, cowardly, shriveled-up, walnut-balled mid-ranger? Whether it is the aggressive, intermittent facade-flickering lower mid-ranger, the overwhelming angel that's the false empath of the middle range type A, the blubbering crybaby that thinks the world is against him, who's the middle range type B, or the haughty and arrogant polished upper mid-ranger, this is what they would do. They would sit down, look at the list, and then say this. Well, as you know, my ex abused me, and the one before that stole money from me, and the one before that, she was just a complete lunatic. I've always told you that my mother's difficult. The neighbour, he's always been problematic because of the way that those apple branches overgrew, and he was completely unreasonable with regard to my proposals. My last boss was a megalomaniac, so that's why I left, and the company that I worked for before, the board just hated me because I was so successful. I can't help it if people take against me, can I? The lollipop lady was out of line. She made a poor remark to our little Johnny. That police officer, well, I had to put a complaint in against him because he was overbearingly arrogant and he wasn't listening to me, so it was no wonder that I ended up having to shove him. And on they will go. Blinded by their narcissism, blinded by the fact that they are at fault, blinded at the fact that the list in itself speaks volumes, namely, you've fallen out with one, perhaps 2 or 5 people in their life, and the mid-ranger has 50 people on that list. He or she is completely incapable of understanding that this shows that they are a problem. Their narcissism will kick in as soon as you say, do you see what the problem is with this list? And their narcissism will reject it. Their narcissism will cause them, because they're a mid-ranger, to go through each and every person on that list to audit it and explain how they are not at fault and how they are the problem. The excuses, the reasons, the projection, the blame shifting. The lack of accountability shines brightly, whereas the lesser is just dismissive in one fell swoop. The mid-ranger, still blinded to their narcissism, but able to recognize that there were problems, so they will talk about the problems in each and every instance, but they will dismiss them by virtue of explaining why it was never their fault. The greater and the ultra are aware of what they are, aware of how they behave. There will be those that suggest there is still a degree of blind spot with regard to those narcissists, that they can't see certain things. But the ability of the greater and the ultra is to see all things. And in a sense, the blind spot is to create one with regard to the victim, so that they don't see precisely what is occurring. If you were to sit down with a greater narcissist, for example, with said list, you'd actually find it more difficult to list the individuals that the greater narcissist has fallen out with. You'd be more likely to believe that certain relationships had foundered and accept that that was the case, and you wouldn't put them on the list. Indeed, you may not know about many of the issues that have occurred because of the secrecy by which the greater narcissist would operate, particularly when it comes to non-romantic dealings. Whilst, of course, there may well have been fallings out in the familial environment, they may not be spoken of, and the greater narcissist maintains a facade. And, of course, invariably, being successful and busy individuals, it makes sense that they don't have as much time to deal with their family because they're always on the go, attending to their various political, military, commercial interests, etc. They live such a long way away from family, and therefore it's understandable that a distant relationship has come about. You won't get to hear about the various Machiavellian dealings, because by their very nature, they are kept hidden and secret from you. All of the backstabbing, the fallouts, the critical clashes that might occur with a business rival, you probably don't get to hear about. With a military rival, are unspoken of. With a commercial rival, you don't get told about. And therefore, the list of the greater would be much smaller, and they would just deal with it in a charismatic and straightforward manner. They may even say, well, yes, I can see how that didn't work out, but of course that sometimes happens, doesn't it? And be dismissive with an aloofness and an arrogance. It might be said that that creates an impression that the greater narcissist is blind to what has occurred. But the greater narcissist knows. The greater narcissist knows that fault could be occasioned to them, but will never accept it by virtue of the narcissism, and he is right and justified in such behaviour. The blindness of the narcissist is most applicable to the lesser and mid-range narcissists as a consequence of the fact that they are not allowed to know what they are, for the reasons that I have explained earlier. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.